The morning she filed for divorce, Lena felt something close to relief. Not happiness exactly. More like the calm that comes after you finally make a decision you've been rehearsing in your head for months. She sat in her car outside the courthouse for a few minutes before driving home. The paperwork was done. The signatures were real. What had once been a shared life was now moving through a legal system that specialized in turning relationships into categories and timelines. By the time she reached the driveway, the feeling had turned into certainty. She opened her phone, stared at the blank post box for a moment, and typed the sentence she had already practiced in her mind. "He's the one losing everything." She posted it without a second thought. Within minutes, the responses started appearing. Friends who had watched the slow decline of her marriage responded with support. A few added subtle comments that implied they had always suspected things were worse than they looked. Someone messaged her privately, "You're finally free." The reactions felt validating in a way she hadn't expected. The narrative was clean, simple, understandable. She had left a marriage that wasn't working. He would face the consequences. What surprised her most was the silence from him. Daniel didn't reply to the post. He didn't call. He didn't even send a message asking why she had made the announcement public. For a man who had always preferred privacy, the quiet almost made sense. But something about it lingered in the back of her mind. Not anger, not denial, just absence. She told herself that was proof she had made the right choice. The next morning, her phone rang while she was making coffee. The name on the screen was her accountant. Martin rarely called unexpectedly. Their conversations were usually scheduled weeks in advance, brief and practical. She answered with mild curiosity. "Good morning." His voice sounded polite, but measured. "Lena, I just saw your message last night. About the divorce." She leaned against the kitchen counter. "Yeah. It's official now." There was a pause on the line. "Right," he said carefully. "That's actually why I'm calling. I was reviewing the asset summaries you requested for the filing." Another pause. "You might want to sit down." She frowned slightly, though she was already sitting. "I'm sitting." Martin exhaled quietly. "Some of the assumptions in the preliminary numbers your lawyer sent over. They don't seem to match the actual ownership structure." The words didn't land immediately. "What do you mean?" "Well," he continued, "many of the investments you listed as shared assets were created before the marriage. They're protected under the prenuptial agreement you both signed." The word prenuptial stirred a distant memory. A stack of papers. A quick conversation years ago before the wedding. At the time, it had felt like a formality. Something wealthy people worried about. She had barely read it. "That can't be right," she said slowly. Martin's voice stayed calm. "It is. I double-checked this morning." He began listing things she had assumed belonged to both of them. The investment account, the commercial property partnership, the retirement portfolio Daniel had been quietly building for years. Each one had the same explanation. Pre-marital asset, protected, separate. Lena felt an odd stillness settle over her. "But the house?" She started. "The house is joint," Martin confirmed. "And the joint savings account, of course." There was another pause. "But the majority of the portfolio remains his." The kitchen suddenly felt quieter. Lena stared at the coffee mug in front of her. "When did all of that happen?" she asked, almost to herself. Martin hesitated. "Over the last 10 years, mostly. You signed the annual disclosures." She had vague memories of those documents. Financial summaries Daniel would leave on the desk for her to review. She rarely read them closely. Not because she didn't care, because she trusted him to handle things. Or maybe because she assumed it would always belong to both of them anyway. On the phone, Martin cleared his throat. "I just wanted to make sure you understood before the legal process moves further. Your lawyer will probably explain the same thing once the full financial discovery is completed." Lena nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Right." They ended the call a few minutes later. The conversation had been professional, calm, informative. Nothing dramatic had happened. Yet something about it shifted the ground beneath the story she had told herself. She opened her phone again. The post from the night before was still gathering reactions. Friends cheering her decision, comments about strength and independence, a few people praising her for taking everything back. She scrolled through them slowly. It wasn't that the divorce was wrong. The marriage had been quiet for years in ways that felt lonely. Conversations had become practical instead of personal. Distance had crept in without either of them fully acknowledging it. Leaving still felt like the honest decision, but the certainty of the post felt different now. She realized something uncomfortable. When she wrote that sentence, "He's the one losing everything," she hadn't actually known what everything meant. Later that afternoon, she drove past Daniel's office building by coincidence, or maybe not entirely by coincidence. Through the glass lobby she could see him speaking with someone near the reception desk. His posture looked the same as always, calm, focused, steady. There was no sign he had seen the post, no sign he planned to respond. He simply looked like a man continuing his day. Lena kept driving. For the first time since filing the paperwork, she wasn't thinking about who had won or lost. She was thinking about how quickly pride can turn a complicated ending into a simple story, and how quietly reality corrects those stories once the noise fades. The divorce would continue. Lawyers would handle the details. Assets would be divided according to agreements written long before the relationship began to fail. Nothing explosive. Nothing dramatic. Just the quiet separation of two lives that had once seemed permanent. Online, people would probably keep believing she had walked away with everything. Offline, the truth would be more complicated. And for the first time since pressing post, Lena understood that the loudest moment of the entire divorce had happened before she actually knew what it meant.